The lifestyle that is becoming more prevalent around the world is actually inducing depression and a decrease in satisfaction in life.
The more you hold back from what you really feel, the more you're performing your life, not living it.
Once you realize that there's actually a third way available that's much more effective, then it makes a lot more sense than it did when we thought our choices, harsh change or just complacent acceptance.
The amount of steps you need to take on a daily basis in order to not get anxious or depressed, or something like this, is 5,649.
Yeah, so let me explain what the study is. So this was a study that took people who were a little bit more active than your average American, not like super exercisers. I think they were averaging something like 9,000 steps a day when they started the study. And then they asked them to reduce their daily step count to what is typical for the average American, so around 5,000, and to not exercise. So like if you have the chance to exercise on purpose, don't. And in this study, after about a week of reducing your activity count to the average American, they actually only got to about whatever that number was you said. It was just over 5,000. 88% of people were reporting symptoms of depression. Nearly everyone had less energy, more anxiety, more stress. They reported a 31% decrease in meaning in life. And so, the way that I take that study, and there are other studies showing this too. So
can I just clarify? So you're saying these are active people,
relatively active people.
Okay, so they're roughly getting 9,000 steps a day. When they go down to around 5,500,
which actually is not just the American average, that's pretty much the worldwide average.
So they go down, and you're saying there was a stat, I think you just mentioned, 88% of them are feeling depressed.
Yes. And they're reporting a decrease in meaning in life and satisfaction with life.
And so this is fundamentally exactly what you're talking about. Movement is engaging with life. Stop moving, and you start to disengage with life.
So I do think that study suggests it's possible that the lifestyle that is becoming more prevalent around the world is actually inducing depression and a decrease in satisfaction in life. I mean, we can talk about why, but there are many reasons that when you become less active, you're changing your metabolism, you're changing your brain chemistry, and you're changing your mood in such profound ways that some people think there's a very large incidence of depression that is caused simply from being sedentary. That's not always going to be the cause, and movement won't always be the cure. But a certain amount of suffering in society may actually be directly caused by the fact that people are living such sedentary lives.
Yeah, I spoke to the researcher, Brendan Stubbs.
Yes, I love his work.
Yeah, I think it came out a few weeks ago. People loved it because he spoke about a lot of the research on movement and depression. Yeah. And a lack of movement can actually start to make some people, and again, none of us are trying to say it covers everything, but for some people it's going to certainly make a difference. And I think we kind of intuitively know that. If anyone's got kids, you will know this feeling. Like if in the UK, certainly if it's raining all weekends and the kids are inside and they start to play up and their mood goes off, simply 10 minutes outside in the garden in the rain, and they're like different people.
But it's also how it changes your brain. So one of the things I write about in the book, I actually did some self-diagnosis. So I found a lot of research suggesting that there are genetic variants that predispose you both to depression and anxiety, as well as predispose you to experiencing the antidepressant effects of movement. So you could basically have genetic risk factors for mental health challenges that make you especially susceptible to the mental health benefits of exercise. So, one study was looking at this particular SNP, this particular genetic variant, that if you have it, you're something like 3 times more likely to experience depression and suicidal thinking. But if you exercise for 30 minutes a day, it almost completely erases that risk. Wow. And so I found a whole bunch of these genetic variants, and I did my 23andMe test, hacked my raw data because my husband is a medical scientist and he helped me out with this. And I have every single genetic variant that is associated with both the increased risk and the increased mental health benefit. And so I feel like sometimes when we talk about how exercise can be an antidepressant, yeah, of course it's true that most people feel better when they exercise, but also it's the case that you can be like me and be born with a temperament and this vulnerability to experience mental health challenges, and exercise can change the function of your brain, can change even the structure of your brain in ways that make you more resilient. And if you are going through an episode of depression, that can help you recover more quickly, and that even enhances your brain's ability to respond positively to things like antidepressant medication or psychotherapy. We know that exercise, it's like an additive, it's like a catalyst that increases your brain plasticity for anything that's good for you, whether it's a drug that you're taking for your mental health or a therapist that you're seeing. And so I feel like that's at a very deep level, exercise is good for mental health. And one of the reasons I like to talk about this is because, for people who have that vulnerability or have that experience, when you're in it, you don't want to move. When you're in it, your brain, it's such like almost a betrayal. If you're in the middle of a depressive episode or grief, your brain will not give you the immediate reward. And so here we can be talking about an endorphin rush or the feel better effect. But if you're actually in a depressive episode or you're grieving, it is very possible that your brain has forgotten how to give you an endorphin rush from movement. And what I want so much for people to know is that that is true. And also, movement is one of the only things you can do that helps your brain remember how to experience reward and hope. And sometimes you have to get through that part of the process where you are moving even though you don't want to. And even though you're like, brain, you were supposed to give me an endorphin rush and I barely got through it. And to know that exercise has such a profound impact on your brain in the long term, that if you can get through that, your experience changes.
You mentioned that genetic susceptibility and that you had all of them when you looked at the data.
Which didn't surprise me. I told my parents that, and my mom was like, not surprised.
Yeah, but yes. What's interesting for me is that you are someone who has had this very passionate relationship with movement. It sounds like your entire life.
Yeah.
Now, I'm interested when that started, but also I'm interested as to now knowing that genetic data, do you think back on reflection that you figured out at a young age, when
yes.
I move, I feel better, and when I don't, I don't feel good, and therefore that has shaped your behaviors for the rest of your life, basically.
Yes. So I'm sure now, if I were growing up now and I was the child I was then, somebody would have thought to send me to therapy. But growing up, I was born in the 70s, growing up, late 70s, 80s, kids weren't going to therapy, at least not where I lived. Nobody was being prescribed mental health drugs. So it was sort of left to me to figure out what to do with a temperament. I mean, from the time I was out of the womb, I was basically scared, anxious, fearful. There was nothing to explain it except this is how my brain worked from the time I was born. And also, I was not an athlete. So one thing I've been saying lately, which is surprising people who know me now, I actually was put in remedial gym class because I was so uncoordinated and slow. There were two of us who were pulled out of our normal class because we just couldn't keep up. We couldn't, I can't catch a ball. It was humiliating actually at the time.
Yeah.
And when I was 7 or 8, there was this wave of aerobics and calisthenics, and I discovered moving at home because my mom would go to these garage sales and buy workout tapes and never do them. She was like, oh, I'm going to become an exerciser, and she never did. But we would have these VHS tapes at home. And so I started doing calisthenics and aerobics at home, and it was a totally different form of movement. So nobody was throwing things at me. Nobody was timing how fast I could go. It was me keeping beat with music and other people's bodies. And I fell in love with jazzercise. And it was the first time I didn't feel like my body was this embarrassing burden that I was dragging around, unable to do the things that other kids could do. And then over years, started when I was 7 or 8, realizing how much it helped me deal with stress and anxiety. Yeah. But I needed to find the movement that I could do too. And we're not all natural born runners. We're not all natural born athletes, but I do believe that there's something in everyone that can be captured, tapped into by some form of movement.
There's quite a few things, Kelly, I want to pick up on there. You mentioned something that was quite humiliating. So at a young age, I'm just trying to imagine, you're the kids who, let's say, you're not getting picked for the team because you're always the last one to get picked, or you're saying that you and somebody else got pulled out of class because you're not coordinated enough to continue with the rest of your peers. That is torture at that age, to feel. And I guess what I'm getting at is there a difference between men and women in this? we've already mentioned the societal narrative around movement and how, if you can't do what your peers can do and you feel humiliated and you're not part of that group, you might change your relationship with movement for the rest of your life.
Yes, there is research on this now. So the research now is looking at, people like our age and older, many of whom had traumatic experiences in gym class or PE. I don't know what it's like in the UK now, but in the US, actually, it's not even required. There are schools now where you don't necessarily have to even take gym or PE.
So that you're not humiliated?
No, just because there's not funding. It's like we don't have art and music class everywhere also now. But I think there's a big shift right now in trying to create less humiliating and traumatizing experiences, because this research shows that if you were picked last, if you have a memory of being shamed because of your body or any other reason that you didn't fit in, there's lots of reasons that kids have been humiliated in sports or gym classes, that it makes you want to avoid movement and exercise for the rest of your life.
So based on that, if you were to give advice to schools, there's a lot of schools, head teachers and teachers who listen to this podcast. Based upon that research then, have you got any advice for them in terms of how they should frame movement and talk about it and manage it at schools? Because you don't want to shape these kids the rest of their life. You don't want to alter their relationship with movement negatively if you can help it.
I mean, and there are a lot of people doing this work, by the way, I should say, a lot of people trying to improve that gym class experience. One thing is autonomy, that people should have choices to identify movements that help them, reduce stress and feel better and connect with others. The most positive experiences I ever had in gym class was when we were given permission to just walk around and talk to our friends. I got more activity doing that than when I was hiding on a field being like, cover me. I hope the ball doesn't come to me because I don't know how to play the sport and I don't want to get hurt. A weightlifting circuit, to be able to do it on your own and choose what you do and how you do it. So to give people a sense of autonomy and to allow people to connect. And the other positive experience I had, for whatever reason, my last year in high school, the gym class instructors decided to allow you to choose into what they called competitive or non-competitive. And we were literally put in different rooms. They put the binders up to close the rooms. And if you opted into non-competitive, everyone was agreeing, we all aren't any good at this and we don't care and we're going to find a way to make it fun. And I realized that I could hit a volleyball for the first time in my life because I wasn't hiding in the back with the competitive players being like, don't let her touch the ball, she's going to drop it. And it was such an amazing experience because none of us cared. And so we were able to play in a different way. So I just think giving people choice, letting people opt into, are you the athlete who wants to use this time to compete and get better and train? Or do you want to just have fun with your friends? Or do you want to be by yourself? Could you let kids listen to music on their headphones and strength train and have that time for themselves? Have it look more like what adults get to do when they choose their own movement.
The reason I'm asking about men and women is because there is, I can't remember the exact name, I think the BBC in the UK have a movement like This Girl Can.
I've seen that.
Yeah, there's some videos. So I think
Australia has that too.
Yeah, it's an awareness. And again, I don't know the exact roots of this. So my interpretation of this is that there is a lot of people saying that girls as they get older don't particularly, and this is a gross generalization, are maybe too self-conscious to move, they're not moving enough. And it's a movement to try and encourage more girls, more women to get moving. Yeah. Now, I think they're targeting this at women because it seems to be more of an issue with women than guys. Has any of your research come across anything like that? And do you have any views on why that might be? So,
and this, you especially see this during adolescence and young adulthood when women experience their bodies being objectified so much for the first time. I think of one of my friend's daughters who stopped going for a run. She loved running, and all of a sudden she hit adolescence and she started getting catcalls and she didn't feel safe and she stopped running. So I think that part of it is suddenly you realize that everyone has an opinion about your body. You go to the gym and people will, even praise can feel quite threatening and unwanted, or you'll get negative comments from people. And that sense of suddenly your body is an object that everyone is evaluating is, I think, one of the things that keeps women from participating in all sorts of activities. There definitely is a cultural movement, though, for women to embrace their strength, embrace their power, embrace their inner athlete or dancer, and to move in any way that feels good. And I think that one of the things I often will talk to fitness professionals about is how important it is to design environments and communities so that if you're walking in for the first time, you understand that you are welcomed and celebrated and not immediately objectified by, like, you know, let's take your before picture, or, you know, let's take your measurements, or the kind of things that can put people in that mindset of, oh, right, my body is an object that's being evaluated, as opposed to this is an opportunity to experience my own strength.
Yeah. I guess the more we talk and the more I think about what you're saying, it's very hard not to shake off this idea that ultimately movement is very personal. And we cannot be, and it's not ideal to be prescribing the same form of movement to everyone, that ultimately we've all got to figure out that, yes, it's a fundamental human quality, not quality is the wrong word. It is what it means to be human, is to move, right? And therefore, if we haven't found that type of movement yet that we love, maybe we need to go on that search for that type of movement that we love.
And trust that it could actually be meaningful. I feel like so often people look for the most convenient form of exercise. Like, I think there's a treadmill somewhere in my office building and I'll go and put in my time. But like, I sometimes ask people, like, if someone were to send you a video, you know, on YouTube, what's the video of movement that you would actually watch and be inspired by? Do you want to see people run an obstacle course? Do you want to see people cross a finish line? Do you want to watch that choreography video? What is it that lights you up when you see other people do it? And maybe even there's a voice in your head that says, I could never do that. Like, that's the activity to move toward, because it can change how you feel about yourself and what you believe is possible for your future. And again, to experiment and to listen to your direct feedback and to follow any thread of joy. I often will tell people who come to my classes for the first time, like, if you have a moment in this class where you were like, oh, I see what this could be, like, then this class is for you, and come back. Because any movement form, this was so great. Movement is like it's a mastery and growth experience. We will pretty much always get better at it, and we will always enjoy it more the more we do it.
You mentioned that people often do the kind of movements that they just have access to. So there's a treadmill in the block, and it's going, put in my time. Now, isn't that an interesting phrase, put in my time? Because when I'm traveling, I don't really go to gyms much. It's just, I don't really have time, and I've found ways to move my body that doesn't require me to go to a gym. But sometimes I'm in hotels, and I will, you know, if I'm up early, I'll go to the hotel gym just to see what's going on and maybe lift some weights or do something. And it's really interesting. You often see people in there who, they look as though they're trying to block out the fact that they're moving. It looks as though this is a torturous process for me. Someone's told me, or I feel I have to be on this treadmill for an hour. So I'm going to do everything I can to numb that experience, whether it's read the newspaper, watch the news, watch Netflix. Now, look, I am not being critical here. I'm just saying what I observe. And I guess sometimes we feel we need to block out the movements that, like, we feel we have to move, but we hate it, so we block it out. Now, I'm wondering, is there any research to show that there's a difference? Let's say you're on the treadmill and you're engaged with that, and you're feeling, you know, how you feel, you know, your limbs are moving, and you know how, you know, what's going on in your brain, and you're sort of processing your emotions, versus blocking it off completely, so you're numbing that experience. Does that movement do something different from the body in those two different examples?
Yeah. So if you are so there's such a thing as positive dissociation during exercise. And for some people, it's actually really important. So one of the things we know is that your brain changes when you go from being inactive to active, that it changes in ways that makes movement not only easier, but more pleasurable. So when people first start to exercise, it often is an aversive experience. It doesn't stay that way for most people, but maybe you have to go 6 weeks of doing regular activity for your brain to start to really reward you for it. So in that time, positive dissociation can be really helpful. That's different than like watching the news and getting angry or scrolling through and answering emails. That's where something like music can come into play, or watching something really exciting on Netflix. And there's research suggesting that if you can combine movement with something you love that is engaging, that it can actually help you stick to movement, have a more positive memory of it. But ultimately, if you can experience a state of flow in movement, that's more rewarding for most people. And it can take some time to find that. But that requires paying some attention to what you're feeling in your body, using it as information to guide your effort, enjoying sensations of feedback from your muscles and your joints and your heart that tell you, I'm alive and I'm doing this, and this is how it feels to lift something heavy or to exert myself in this way. And often, like, that's how you found the right workout for you, where you can find a flow in it, where you don't feel like you need to distract yourself from it.
Yeah.
And you can find a flow in anything. Like, it can be, it's not like you can only find it in some traditionally meditative experience like yoga or Tai Chi. People find their flow in all sorts of movement forms. There's so much of it that's personality, and so much about what your body kind of was built for. I talked to a lot of people who told me they thought they hated exercise until they found, and then fill in the blank. And maybe it was rowing or swimming. Like, some people need to get in the water and they have a totally different experience of movement in their bodies. Yeah. Some people needed to get outdoors. And because of the way that nature changes your brain activity and your mood, suddenly they can find a flow walking or jogging outdoors that they could never find on a treadmill. And again, for me, it's music. Anything can become enjoyable if I have the right playlist.
We've used the terms movement and exercise a lot during this conversation so far. Can we use those terms interchangeably, or are they actually different things?
They do mean different things technically. I love the word exercise. I'm not scared of it. So movement is using your body to engage with life. It's almost everything, right? We talked about it. Me talking right now is technically movement. Exercise is often defined as moving your body for the purpose of the activity that you're doing. I am running because I want to run, not because someone is chasing me. I am dancing because I want to dance, not because someone is paying me to perform on a stage, right? I'm lifting heavy things because I want to lift heavy things, not because I'm moving from one apartment to another and I have to lift heavy things. That's what exercise is. It's movement that you are choosing to do for its own sake, because of its meaning, its pleasure, or its benefits to you. So I think too many people define exercise as forcing yourself to do movement you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And that's not what it is.
Yeah, by that definition, exercise is not a helpful term, but by your definition, it can be a very helpful term.
Yeah.
Do different forms of movement do different things? And what I mean by that is, we've got in the common vernacular a term, the runner's high, right? So I know you've written about this. I'd love to expand a bit on what that runner's high is and why everyone might not feel it. But also, I do like to run, but I also sometimes like to lift heavy weights. And I know if I have done a heavy deadlift, and as I'm walking out of the gym, I don't know, you feel strong, you feel powerful, you feel like you feel like a different person walking out than the person you felt like walking in. So what is going on there? What is changing in your body? What is the runner's high? What are these endorphins that everyone talks about? Because as I read your book, Kelly, I more and more feel that reducing movement down to simply being about an endorphin high is far too simplistic.
So different forms of movement can affect your mood in two different ways. You will get different changes in your brain chemistry based on what you're doing. And also, every movement form has its own qualities. So you talked about feeling strong or powerful or confident. And every movement form will bring something else out in you. And so part of how movement makes you feel is what it is that it asks you to express. Are you expressing your determination, your playfulness and creativity, your ability to cooperate with others? But the other part is actually different movement forms will lead to different changes in what's happening in your brain. So you mentioned the runner's high. I call it a persistence high, because it's a common effect in your brain when you get your heart rate up a little bit and you're using your muscles to use energy for about 20 minutes at a moderate intensity. And it really is about continuous movement rather than about running specifically. It's just that running, because it's so continuous, jogging actually is even a better way to get a runner's high than running. It basically tells your brain, we're doing this, and so I need a payoff to help me continue doing it. And you can get this basic high from anything that puts your body in motion and you're willing to commit to it for about 20 minutes. And it's driven, it seems to be driven not mostly by endorphins. To get a true endorphin rush from movement, you typically need to add one of three things: more intensity, other people, or music. And if you add those, you can get an endorphin rush from pretty much any type of movement. But the classic runner's high is fueled by endocannabinoids, which as a brain chemical is different than endorphins in a way that I think is really interesting. So we know that endorphins tend to basically block pain and create euphoria, which is why, by the way, with the right playlist or when you're moving with other people, that can really make you feel euphoric, because that will really give you an endorphin rush, or pushing yourself to fatigue. But endocannabinoids, what they do is whatever's going on in your brain that we would think of as unpleasant, it starts to dampen it down. So endocannabinoids are basically, they modulate other systems of the brain. So if you've got pain, physical pain, if you've got stress, anxiety, anger, higher levels of endocannabinoids are basically going to calm those things down in your brain. And endocannabinoids also facilitate anything that is pleasurable. So anything good that's happening, it's going to amp up. And one of the things that it particularly seems to amp up is the pleasures of social connection. So when endocannabinoid levels are higher, everything that's pleasurable is more pleasurable, but like your story is more interesting. Your jokes are funnier. If you give me a high five, it's going to feel more satisfying. Or if you give me a hug, it's going to feel better. Or if I'm able to help you, I'm going to get more of that helper's high, that warm glow. And I think that's really interesting because, right, so endorphins make you feel really good. It's like a high. But the runner's high is more about sort of putting you into a brain state that allows you to be a good version of yourself in community. And there's a lot of like anthropological speculation about why that would be. But the idea is basically human beings, we are adapted to be physically active and cooperate in communities. And as soon as you are moving your body and getting your heart rate up, your brain is like, oh, right, we're hunting, we're foraging, we're gathering. And then we need to bring it back to our tribe, and we need to share with one another. And we need to feel good about the fact that I just, spent 2 hours out in the field gathering food, and now I'm giving it away to other people so that they can eat. And that's what the runner's high is. It's a brain state that allows you to sustain optimism and effort, and that makes you enjoy connecting with other people even more. And this is why exercise is like the best reset you can do for yourself. Because just imagine, like every time you exercise, you're becoming that version of yourself.
I mean, I'm blown away listening to this, Kelly. It's putting a lot of the pieces together that people kind of intuitively feel, but you're giving some of those mechanisms and some of the science behind why they feel the way that they feel. I love looking at things through an evolutionary lens, and it makes sense when you look at it. Why would it cause these things in the body? Yeah, it would bring us together. It would help us with our tribe, with our community. In fact, one of my favorite bits in the book is when you talk about the Hadza tribe, and what goes on in that, and how much they move per day, and also how their elderly tend to move. They tend to move more as they get older, I think I read.
Yeah, you continue to be an active part of your community. So this is one of the last hunter-gatherer societies. And I think the research is that they are moderately to vigorously active for a couple hours a day. That's like that higher intensity activity. And then another couple of hours of sort of lighter to moderate activity, like walking around. And the evolutionary idea is that this is how humans survived. We were willing to exert ourselves because the climate changed and humans had to do that in order to feed themselves. And we were willing to cooperate and share. And, one of the themes of the research as I experienced it and in talking to people is that you really they are so connected. The rewards that we get from playing an active role in our lives, literally active, being engaged, exerting ourselves, pursuing meaningful goals, and the rewards that we get from connecting with other people and being part of a community, they are so connected that it's one of the reasons why people who are physically active are less lonely. They have better relationships with other people. There's something about being sedentary that makes it more difficult to be that version of ourselves that thrives in community. And I don't mean, I don't want to shame anyone who doesn't exercise or feels like they can't for physical or mental health reasons. And yet at the same time, I feel like it's really important to express this message that to whatever degree you can move your body, it makes you a different version of yourself that is not, it's not even just better for other people. It allows you to experience that core human joy of interdependence.
Yeah. I mean, Kelly, we've both written books on stress, and we know very well that exercise helps make us more resilient to stress. And, you know, one of the things I loved reading about in the book was how those areas of the brain that help us manage stress, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, have got relatively high concentrations for endocannabinoids.
Yes, and oxytocin, which is something else that can get released from exercise. Yeah, so how exercise helps us with stress, it is both on that short term. So if you're feeling stressed out, you're feeling anxious or angry, it's going to change your brain chemistry in a way that gives you more hope and more energy. That's the common denominator. That's the feel better effect. But also we know that people who are regularly active, it actually changes the structure and the function of their brains in ways that basically teaches the brain how to be resilient to stress and also more sensitive to joy. So you're going to have an increased availability of dopamine and endocannabinoid and endorphin receptors. Your brain is basically going to say, oh, I guess we can experience joy and meaning in life and hope and optimism. So let's just be ready for it in a way that increases people's mood and joy in a much more generalized way. But the one thing I wanted to make sure we talk about, I mentioned it once, myokines, which I think is the most exciting area of research in terms of how exercise affects stress resilience and mental health, is this new observation. And forgive me, I don't know if you've talked about this on your podcast yet, have you?
No, I haven't.
Okay, great. Let me be the one who gives the good news. So just in the last decade or so, biologists have realized that our muscles are basically an endocrine organ. And just like your pituitary gland, your adrenal glands, they can synthesize and pump out proteins and peptides into your bloodstream that affect every system of your body. So your muscles will manufacture these proteins and peptides, and they basically release them into your bloodstream when you contract your muscles in a regular and continuous way. So any form of exercise, any form of movement. And some of these proteins and these chemicals, so they're called myokines, which just means set into motion by your muscles. Some of them kill cancer cells. Some of them reduce inflammation. Some of them are good for your immune function. They're good for your cardiovascular health. Some of them help you regulate blood sugar. So a lot of scientists now think myokines are the reason that exercise is good for your health and prevents every kind of disease. It reduces your risk. I mean, we're all going to get something, but reduces your risk. But what I'm so fascinated by as a psychologist is some of these myokines have their strongest effects on your brain. So let's say you go for a walk or you're lifting weights and your muscles are pumping these chemicals out into your bloodstream that can cross your blood-brain barrier. And in your brain, their primary effect is to act as an antidepressant and to change the structure of your brain in ways that make you more resilient to stress, whether that's changes to your hippocampus or your prefrontal cortex. And some of the first researchers who wrote about this called them hope molecules. Because they're like, but well, in part, it's for these horrible studies that I don't particularly endorse where you traumatize rodents and then you either have them exercise or you literally inject them with some of these myokines. And what you find is they don't become traumatized and depressed psychologically in the way that they normally would if you traumatize them. And so they're like, it's like your muscles are manufacturing hope molecules when you exercise. And this to me is like the miracle of the human form The idea that your muscles can manufacture antidepressants and they will deliver them to your brain when you exercise, and it's all of your muscles. So if you can't use your legs, you can use your arms. If you can't use your arms, maybe you can brace your core. If you can move any muscles, your muscles will release these chemicals that support your health and support your brain resilience. And it's something that you can choose, even if you don't have access to other forms of mental health care. Yeah. It's miraculous, and that your muscles know how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. I tell you what popped into my head. I was thinking about elderly people who maybe are immobile and are sat down for a lot of the day and maybe have lost their balance. I'm thinking, well, maybe they can have a couple of light dumbbells next to their chair. And yeah, maybe their legs aren't working, but maybe if every day they at some point, for 5-10 minutes, just rock out a few bicep curls, you're going to be releasing those myokines. You're going to be getting those hope molecules. You're going to be having all these changes to your mood, your physiology, your inflammation.
And the literal structure of your brain. I mean, you literally are building a different brain.
Yeah, so to really try and think about making this accessible to everyone, even people who maybe are sedentary, might be able to do something like that to get some of these benefits. And I think that's incredibly empowering for people.
Yeah. And I've been really curious about this because a lot of the early research was looking at higher intensity exercise and athletes. And there does seem to be a bit of a dose response relationship where anything you do is going to release these positive myokines. Any form of movement. When you go from zero to anything, this is why I think we know that people who move for 10 minutes a day have reduced risk of mortality. It's everything counts. And also, the more you do, the longer you do it, and the harder it is, the more your muscles release myokines. And I think this explains why a lot of people who are recovering from addiction, recovering from depression, recovering from grief, recovering from stroke, because of how it enhances your brain's ability to recover, many people find that actually intensity is like upping your dose of a medicine that's really good for you. And I feel like it's important to point both of those out because I can't tell you how many people I spoke to who needed to find for themselves a certain level of intensity that was almost like a switch was flipped in their psychological well-being. And so this is that, in the great tradition of improv, it's yes and. Yes, do anything and it will help you. And also, to the degree that you are choosing to push to the level of intensity that challenges you, you can really have dramatic changes in your mental health and your brain health.
Yeah, incredible. Really, really incredible.
Fear is a natural, instinctive response to something that might be wrong. Something's up. And when we feel it and observe it, we need to take action to deal with that. That's what I call in the book, in the moment fear. The problem, like chronic inflammation, is where we don't sufficiently turn down the volume and we allow it to become chronic and embedded culturally and personally into the way that we go about life. So it becomes this constant companion, particularly as I talk about the fear of not being good enough, this constant companion in life that we don't even see well enough to know how to turn off. So, it's not just about the being able to turn it down. We don't even notice it. Excuse me. We don't even see it well enough to turn it down. And that's what I want to do with the book, to try and get people to actually see the real stuff. So they're working on the real stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. As I have been rereading the book, the sentiment that comes across to me more than anything is that you're helping people gain awareness. You're almost shining a light on something that is there that people don't realize is there. But early on in the book, you said that you mentioned shame, inadequacy, loneliness, jealousy, dissatisfaction. 5 very powerful sentiments that I think many of us feel on a daily basis. I think you're saying that what unifies them all is an underlying fear.
Yes. It's like fear is the root. Shame's a little, I'll put shame to one side because that's kind of a much trickier, more complex one. But on the others, perfectionism, sort of superiority, judgment, jealousy, as you said, the root of all of that is fear, and fear of not being good enough, fear of being rejected, being unlovable, being abandoned, which is sort of just an absolutely primal fear. We have two massive primal fears in life. One is death, of course, and the end of our own existence, and the other is abandonment. And in our contemporary lives, the way that plays out for us now is, I'm not going to be good enough. Not that I'm actually going to be abandoned, but I'm not going to be good enough. I might be outcast socially. I might be rejected in some way. And that's a chronic background noise, a chronic background fear that I think is so pervasive in our lives. That's dramatic. And for me, where we see the other emotional expressions like criticism and self-criticism, let's say, but it can be equally towards others, or jealousy, they're just manifestations and expressions of what is underneath a root cause of the root cause is fear.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that. I've got to say, since I read your book, I think I've really been thinking about this as an idea quite a lot. I've really been thinking, I mean, I've been moving in the last couple of years, especially. It's really thinking about the emotions that drive my patients. So when I'm seeing a patient with, a chronic health condition, I've been really on a journey over my career. I'm sure you have, and I'm interested how you practice has changed since you qualified to now. But I've certainly evolved how I treat my patients, how I talk to them, as I understand more. And I really feel that their emotional health, the way they view their condition, the way they view their disease, the way they view their life, plays a massive role in not only how do they cope with what they've got, but sometimes it influences the development often in the first place. I found that really, really interesting. Now, you have worked, Pippa, with some of the most successful people in society, certainly by society's definition of success, which we can sort of unpack. But you also said, a few minutes ago, a feeling of not being good enough is behind a lot of this. And there is such insight in this book that I feel that it can't just be from the papers you've read and the education you've been given. There's a strong feeling I get that you have been on a personal journey with this yourself. And then just before we arrived today, I was looking at the acknowledgements in your book at the end. And it was sort of there right in front of me when you were saying, even after you helped the England football team, it's widely mentioned that you helped them get to the semi-finals. But even with that, in inverted commas, success, you still felt a degree of imposter syndrome about writing a book.
I love that you've brought this up because it gives us the opportunity to look at it on two levels. Firstly, it's what happens in my own mind, in my sense of imposter, or where I'm at, and do I actually have the authority, or am I credible enough or wise enough to share advice or wisdom or guidance, or be an ally to somebody walking along a journey around their own emotions, which I think I hope that most people working in health or in psychology maintain a bit of that. I hope that they keep a bit of that because it's a nice mirror to hold up. But it can also become more than a humility, and it can become it can hamstring you to think I'm not good enough. And there's a distinction we can dig into. But the other side also is that it's cultural. So even when you are maybe you've experienced this yourself as you moved into public life from sort of a GP life. There is a sense of, I think this is where shame comes in. There's a sense of like, do I have permission to speak out loud, to share what I have worked out, or will there be a sort of a sense of you better keep your head down, and that is also part of the fear of not being good enough. So, culturally, we're very heavily conditioned to react, to be jumpy towards shame. And shame comes in at us from being infants. That's not a natural, deep from it comes deep from our unconscious, but it's not natural in the way that a fear energy is a natural response. Shame is completely learnt. So there's the cultural permission to feel, am I good enough to speak? Or am I going to get, have I earned enough stripes to be in a public domain speaking? And then there's the personal kind of level of acceptance and, the ability to step beyond that and say, well, if I've got something to share that might be useful, why would I not?
Yeah. It's really powerful, this, because, hearing what you said, you sort of asked me the question, have I felt it in some ways from going more from being a GP in a practice every day to sort of sharing my work week, where now a lot of what I do is about, I was going to say educating the public, but I prefer inspiring and empowering the public rather than education, I think is what I do, or I certainly try to do. And I have felt a huge degree of imposter syndrome the whole way through. I mean, even over the last couple of days when I'm trying to finish off the edits for my fourth book, which is going to be which is a compassionate approach to weight loss, which will come out at the end of the year. I've been questioning myself, thinking, are you an expert in this area to write about it? What gives you the right to do this? Have you been on that journey yourself? And I'm thinking, on a day where you've not slept so well and things aren't going well, you can easily fall into that. And then you can flip that on another day where you feel good. You think, well, hold on, I've been seeing people for nearly 20 years now. I've got such a wealth of experience to share with people. So yeah, I think all people suffer from this. Well, a lot of people suffer from this. And I really like what you said, fear is natural, but shame is not. So what happens then, Pippa, right? So let's say this all starts off at a root with fear. So something happens, I'm guessing for a lot of us, it's in our childhood, we get scared. Then what happens in the body? When does it become shame? When does it become jealousy? When does it become inadequacy? Is it our interpretation of that initial primal fear? Is that what happens?
Yes. Basically, as mammals, we're probably the most vulnerable for the longest in terms of when we're born, we're utterly helpless. Other mammals have their own resources and their own capabilities much quicker than we do. And we're, it's kind of at least 9 months or more before we can really communicate at a level that lets anybody know that we have got a need. So we're utterly dependent on caregivers for a very long time. So our fear faculties, our fear responses in what I describe simplistically as the old circuitry in our brain, including the amygdala, that's all fully developed before we're born. So it's there before any of our other resources, like the ability to speak or to make ourselves heard in, our needs heard. That's all already there. So we're primed to feel fear and act quickly on the basis of it. And then right through our childhood, we get messages. Now, these are not just personal. These are absolutely culturally embedded messages. They're not just about your primary caregiver. Of course, that's central. But we get messages the whole time. Look right, stand straight, don't do it that way, do it this way. This is what a little girl should be, etc. There's messages everywhere about what good enough is, how you become a good person. And they are, if not unpacked and if not surrounded by compassion and loads of love and loads of kindness, they readily compound to become shame.
Yeah.
And shame for me is the deadliest of our emotions. I would say as deadly as hate. I think that has the biggest impact on our life. And fear and shame come very close together. The difference is fear in its essence is natural. When we don't know how to turn it down, it becomes pervasive and shame comes in.
Yeah. You mentioned we have these messages. So let's say a little girl gets told that they should behave like this. And I guess that's something I've seen firsthand within my family. So my mum, who grew up in India, has had a very, I wouldn't say fixed, she's got some views on how a girl should behave. And my wife and I are very particular with not instilling those in our children, saying you can be whatever you want, you don't have to act a certain way, you act in a way that feels right to you. And there's often a bit of friction sometimes when my daughter goes round to mums and mum says, oh, you're speaking really loudly, little girls shouldn't do that. And she actually screams even more back to almost sort of stand her ground there, who says, which I'm really pleased about, because it's not as if my mum doesn't love her. She has a different narrative around what a girl should do. And I know from reading some of your biographies and some things about you that you are very passionate about empowering women. And I wonder if we could maybe just explore why that is and how that sort of plays into the fact that girls at a young age are often taught to behave and act a certain way.
The reason I'm passionate about women and girls is because I thoroughly believe in them. I am under no illusion that there's anything less about a woman or a girl than a man or a boy. But we're socially conditioned still to have some of that kicking around in the background. And the idea that girls behave in a certain way or girls can do certain things, there's some really old narratives, some really old ideas that we just haven't shook out yet. We just haven't really given them another look for contemporary 2020 society, and they don't work anymore. So we I'm not sure they ever did, but they certainly don't now. And, we still sort of have them, even if it's just quietly or toned down in the background, they're still there. That's why there's a gender pay gap. That's why there's a glass ceiling, or that's why little girls are supposed to look a certain way, or that's why women are far too concerned about their physical presentation in a way that diminishes confidence or stops them perhaps being as bold as they might naturally be. And I would love us to get to a place where women and girls can just really flourish because they don't have that kicking around in the background, this idea that if they behave a certain way, they'll be less. They won't be good enough.
Yeah. I guess girls have a specific set of societal pressures to overcome. But I guess that feeling that you need to almost suppress who you are on the inside and present a different view to the world is endemic across society. And guys and boys also face that. I will be super mindful in a very different way. I understand that. But there's a section in your book, I think, about uniformity. And I think there was something in it. I think, is it a poverty? There's a poverty of, perhaps you could explain what you said rather than me trying to remember.
Yeah, I'm talking about there's a poverty in uniformity. So when we try and make everybody cookie cutter the same, when we have this sort of central idea of what good looks like or what enough looks like, and everybody's moving to that middle ground, I think it strips us of the richness of our humanness, of everything that we are, of the spirit in a way, and for me, when we just try and conform to one archetype, one way of being, what a loss, because we have to trim off all these slightly untidy edges that are where all the gorgeousness is in people. And I think that's such a shame. I see that a lot in sport.
Yeah. I think you're being very kind when you say it's such a shame, actually, because I think it's problematic. I think it's deeply problematic. And, as a parent of two young children who you've met on your way in today, how I and my wife bring them up is probably the most important thing to me. And really, I want them to flourish into independent thinkers who feel they can express themselves in whatever way they choose to. It was so interesting that my son, right, I remember this, as I think as a 2-3-year-old, he used to love the color pink, right? Love it. And he would always say, yeah, Daddy, that's my favorite color. Then he rocks up to school within 2 or 3 months of being in reception at his first school, something, pink's a girl's color, and it's a small thing, but it's prevalent everywhere. So now, it's trying to, if pink is your favorite color, I'd love him to be able to express that. And I want to unpack that, but also I want to unpack, what do you think about school uniforms? Because uniforms on one level allow equality, right, at school. But then the flip side to that might be, and I don't know the answer to this, I'd welcome your opinion on this, can they in some ways be problematic in that they maybe condition us into thinking we have to look and be the same as everyone else?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, when we were growing up, we didn't have any money. It was tough times. And I remember that I used to look forward so much to my school uniform, because that would mean that there was... it was sort of a dropping of categorization. It made everybody the same in some ways. But then it comes in, who's got the most expensive trainers kind of thing. So it all goes to the side anyway. But you can look at this even in terms of like, why do people wear suits and ties? Why do we still do that? What is it about moving to that sort of central model of how you're supposed to be, whether you're a child or an adult, working in a bank kind of thing? You're still doing that same thing, that there is this way of being that shuts down so much of ourselves. And I think it's a shame. But, there are probably, it's like it's one of the trappings of how we show ourselves as good enough or the same or proper or professional, or, all these ways of showing ourselves as enough and fitting in and conforming. But I think maybe more importantly is how free we feel to share opinions, to put our views out there, to express what we care about and not have to trim it, tidy it up, hold back so much. That's really where the pain is and the loneliness, I think, for a lot of people. Because the more you hold back from what you really feel, the more you're performing your life, not living it. And that's a problem.
That I could feel shivers as you said that. You're performing in your life, not living it. That is so powerful, Pippa, because, I see that with society. I see it with people around me. I see it with my friends. I've seen it with myself.
Yeah.
And I've shared this before. One of the most fun things I do in my entire life is this podcast. And I'll explain to you why that is. It's because I spent a lot of time this summer thinking about values, personal values. I went off social media for about 3 weeks.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it was a purposeful intention, not to say that everyone should do it. I would never feel arrogant enough to tell someone how they should live their life, but I just like to share what I'm doing, and it worked for me. And I was trying to think about, what are my personal values in life, and are my actions consistent with what I think my values are? But in terms of this podcast, the values are, authenticity, honesty, vulnerability. And I think in many ways, maybe one of the reasons I started it and moved to this more long-form conversation is because I think it's what I needed. I think for much of my life, I have performed at life. I've not really lived my life. And I really feel these days, I do live my life. I feel I share everything on this show. And it's freeing. It gives you more energy. There's something, what was it I read this morning in your book? You said something about, it was something about energy and how it's draining living someone else's life, right? It's knackering.
Yeah. And also just living half of your own.
Something I've observed over the years, particularly as I've got more and more experienced, is when you look at the patients who really transform and change their lives, not just in the short term, but also in the medium term and long term. As I've sort of become more aware of this, I'm seeing that it actually is because of self-compassion. It's those ones who start to quieten down and then ultimately eliminate that inner voice, that nasty inner voice in their heads, that actually starts to change things. So it's, for me, I feel that self-compassion is really important for health outcomes as well as our day-to-day well-being. And I guess the question I'd put to you at the start, for people who are listening, for people who are watching, who are skeptical, right? Why should anyone consuming this podcast at the moment be bothered about self-compassion?
Right. So, well, self-compassion is really the antidote to our more habitual way of being, which is harshly self-critical, right? Or really cold to ourselves. And talk about health, right? There's just a new meta-analysis that came out showing that self-compassion is linked to physical as well as emotional health, because of course, I'm sure as you know, our state of mind impacts our body, right? And how healthy and how well it's functioning. So when you're harshly self-critical or cold to yourself, and by the way, believe it or not, we don't want to judge ourselves for judging ourselves. We don't want to beat ourselves up for beating ourselves up, because really what's happening when we're really hard on ourselves is we're just trying to stay safe, right? We feel threatened in some way when we feel we're inadequate or we've made a mistake. We feel like, oh gosh, I better need to change this because it's going to cause problems in my life. And so we go into the threat defense mode. You know, we attack ourselves, thinking that somehow if we attack ourselves, we're gonna whip ourselves into shape and we'll be better, and therefore we'll be safe. So it kind of comes, the underlying motive of self-criticism is a good one. The problem is it's really counterproductive, right? So first of all, when we're really hard on ourselves or harsh with ourselves, it activates the sympathetic nervous system response, which is associated with things like high cortisol levels, inflammation, high heart rate, eventually high blood pressure and heart attacks, things like that. So when we're constantly in, you might call it the freak out mode, the threat defense mode, we feel really threatened. You know, our body's on very high alert to deal with the danger. But if the danger is really like, does this dress make me look fat? You know, I'm sorry, but, you know, things like that, the things we criticize ourselves for constantly means we feel like a lion is chasing us. And that constant activation actually is bad for our physical health. So what self-compassion does is, by the way, it doesn't say, oh, that's fine, you don't need to change, but it says, okay, maybe you do need to change, but it does it with encouragement and support as opposed to harsh self-criticism. It's kind of like ultimately a really wise coach or a really compassionate parent. A compassionate parent doesn't say to their child, you know, okay, little Johnny, you don't want to go to school today. That's fine. Oh, you want the whole entire bag of cookies? Oh, I love you so much. That's not a compassionate parent, right? That parent is harming their child. A compassionate parent cares about their child, wants the best for them. And so the same thing with self-compassion. If we care about ourselves and want the best for ourselves, we're going to make change unhealthy behaviors. We're going to try to reach our goals. We're going to do whatever we need to do to be healthy. And so what happens when we're self-compassionate at the physiological level is it actually taps into the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is the system that gets activated when we feel loved, when we feel cared for, when we feel connected, when we feel secure, like in our tribe, right? And this helps us feel calm and relaxed. It lowers cortisol levels and increases heart rate variability and improves things like sleep. And that's why self-compassion is also linked to better physical health, right? So think about this. There's been a lot of work done with Army veterans, people who in the USA who had seen combat either in Iraq or Afghanistan. And they found that those veterans who were self-compassionate about what they had faced and also maybe what they had done, in other words, who are in their ally to themselves, who have their own back, as opposed to beating themselves up all the time or feeling a lot of shame about what had happened or just total despair. Those who were supportive of themselves were less likely to develop post-traumatic stress syndrome. They could function a lot better coming back to daily life. They were less likely to abuse alcohol, less likely to try to commit suicide, which unfortunately is a big problem among veterans. You know, so when you go into life's a battle, not always, but often life's a battle. I mean, this coronavirus is certainly, we talk about it like this battle. Who do you want inside your head as you go into battle? Do you want an enemy who's cutting you down, who's shaming you, who's saying, oh, you're crap, I hate you? Or do you want an ally who says, I got your back, we can do this, I believe in you, I'm here for you? Clearly, we're going to be stronger, more competent, more able to deal with the difficulties of life when we're our own ally, when we support ourselves, as opposed to pulling the rug out underneath ourselves, which we do with self-criticism.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy, because as you were talking then, I was thinking about, well, what's the opposite of self-compassion? Is there an opposite to self-compassion?
Yeah, so compassion, like in terms of how we measure compassion, it's an increase in positive behaviors like being kind to yourself, being mindful, feeling connected to others, and it's a decrease in things like self-criticism, feeling isolated from others, or feeling what's called over-identified. That's when you kind of exaggerate and get lost in how bad things are.
Yeah.
So both change simultaneously.
I love how you brought up the stress response, because I find that most things these days, when it comes to health and well-being, can be explained on an evolutionary level, particularly when we just look at our core stress response. And it strikes me that the stress response really evolved, didn't it, to help us against those physical threats.
Exactly.
But you're sort of saying that actually, if we don't practice self-compassion, if we're harsh with ourselves, if we're critical of ourselves, then we're still activating the stress response, not against a physical threat, but almost against our concept of who we are ourselves. And actually, we're not getting away from ourselves. We live with ourselves. We're with ourselves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So actually, you're making this powerful case that actually, if that's happening, if we have that negative view of ourselves, or we talk to ourselves in a really harsh way, which is so common, and I would imagine is the norm in society, well, many of us are activating our stress responses every single day.
Absolutely. So basically, when we attack ourselves, our body is acting, the sympathetic nervous system is activated, often more so than physical danger. I mean, if we think of how stressed we get and how upset we get when we feel shame, or maybe you've got to like publicly speak and you say something really wrong, or these things can be incredibly scary, right? Incredibly activating, and our bodies feel it. And I have to say, I just did a little bit of cross-cultural research, and the UK was near the bottom of 17 countries I looked at in terms of levels of self-compassion. And I think it's partly because the USA was also fairly low. It was like seventh to the bottom, but the UK, I think, was just about the lowest. And I think it really comes from, again, we don't want to beat ourselves up for beating ourselves up, because it comes from this underlying desire to be safe and healthy. The idea of, well, just push it through, get through it, don't complain. And kind of it's this idea that if I'm really hard on myself, that somehow that's going to help me, or somehow that's going to help other people. It's going to make me less self-centered. It's going to make me, less of a complainer. The problem is it's just wrong. I mean, the research shows it's just wrong.
Yeah. So
for instance, self-criticism is an incredibly self-focused state. And it's also unmotivating. So let me back up a little bit. It kind of works in some circumstances. I mean, there are people I'm sure who could get through med school off of harsh self-criticism. But what it does is it creates these you might say unwanted side effects that are really damaging, right? So for instance, it lowers your sense of self-confidence. It makes you more anxious. So for instance, if you take a really big exam and you're afraid that if you don't get the score you need, you're going to beat yourself up, that's actually going to make you more anxious as you're taking the test, and it's going to lower your ability to perform at your best. Also, when you do fail, and even doctors who are expected to be gods, they're only human, right? What happens is when you fail, because you can't handle the failure, oftentimes people just give up. Well, then I'll just drop out of med school, or I'll just do something else, or make some other choice, because it feels so unacceptable to fail. Whereas with self-compassion, right, it's a much more effective motivator. So put it this way, shame is not exactly a get up and go mind state. I think we can all kind of recognize that. Also saying it's okay, don't worry about it, that's not a motivator either, but that's not self-compassionate. Self-compassion, if you imagine this coach, maybe like a football coach, in the British term, soccer coach, who's like really good, really knows their stuff, really believes in their players. And that coach is not going to like just let their players slide if they're doing something that's not good. They're going to say, hey, I know you can do better. Here's how to do better. What can we learn from our mistakes, right? How can we practice and make up for any weaknesses so we can do better in the next game? That's the type of mindset that a compassionate mindset is. And it's just much more effective and it's more sustainable over time. So for instance, when you criticize yourself, it's painful, right? It actually starts to harm your body. It starts to harm, it feels bad. It hurts you. Self-compassion, this is the amazing thing. Even though it's aimed at suffering by definition, so it's like when we're feeling badly about ourselves, or maybe we're just going through a really hard time in our lives, when we kind of embrace ourselves like a friend with kindness, with support, with care, even though we're suffering, compassion itself is a positive emotion and activates the reward centers of the brain, right? We all want kindness. We want to feel connected. We want to feel that peace of mindfulness. These are positive states of mind. So what we're doing is we're holding a negative experience with this positive state of mind, but not in a way. It's not like sugarcoating. It's not like positive thinking. It's not denying the negative state of mind. It's not like saying, oh yeah, things are fine. Yeah, everything's going to be wonderful. Every day I'm getting stronger and stronger, because I actually may not be, maybe I'm sick. So it doesn't repress or sugar or paper over the negative feelings. It embraces the negative feelings and says, okay, this is reality. This is what is. This is hard. How can I help myself deal with this? And so the warmth and the kindness and the feeling of connection, everyone struggles. That actually gives us the strength and sense of support as we're coping with the negative emotions simultaneously. So it's like generating good feelings alongside of recognizing the bad feelings. And this is really the power of it, because it allows us to more productively deal with the problems we have. It feels good. It helps us to connect with other people, and it's much more sustainable over time.
As we record this, we're in the middle of January, and I've just coming towards the end of 2 weeks off, I guess, a virtual book tour. I released a couple of weeks ago a book which is it's called Feel Great, Lose Weight, but it's a compassionate approach to people who have been struggling to lose weight for many years.
Yes.
And what's been really interesting in all the media interviews, there's a question that often comes up, which is to do with that whole motivation piece. And it's really interesting that I say, look, everyone's been on a diet before for 2 or 3 weeks and lost a bit of weight or felt a little bit better. But the question is, how many of those people are still able to make those changes long lasting in 2 months and 3 months and 4 months and 5 months? And I find myself a lot talking to these interviewers on TV saying, well, look, you can lose weight on any diet in January, frankly, if that's what your goal is. But what I see as a doctor is in March time, not only have people put back on the weight, they've gone higher, but even worse, they've damaged their feeling of self-worth. They don't blame the diet. They feel like failures. And that feeling of being a failure leads to them going, screw it, and leads to more comfort eating and more negative behaviors. And actually, there's a whole section on compassion and actually, what is that inner voice? How do you talk to yourself? And I can't tell you how many messages, Kristen, I've had over the last 2 weeks, private messages from people saying, that is so impactful because I am really harsh with myself. I talk to myself like I would talk to nobody else. Yes. And I guess that is, and this is what doesn't get spoken about in many conditions, but something like weight loss, which all around the world, people are trying to lose weight in a sustainable way. They're trying to beat themselves up. They're trying to be the drill sergeant. They're trying to be the kind of mean coach saying, come on, you can do this. When actually, when you shift to having that compassionate voice to yourself, the changes, they may not be as quick, but they're certainly more long lasting and more sustainable, right?
Yeah. Yes. So let me tell you a study, one of the earliest studies that came out on self-compassion and dieting behavior. And there's a lot of research showing that, yeah, it helps people lose weight. It helps them do intuitive eating, so they don't eat when they're stuffed, because they don't need to emotionally eat, because they have a better, healthier way to deal with their pain than food, which is self-compassion. But in this study, what they did is they had they gathered, I think it was mainly women who are on a diet. These were undergraduates, and as part of, and they had them come in to do one of these psychology subject pools. So they all had to take this and participate in this experiment. And they pretended that they were doing a taste testing session as part of the experiment. And one of the things that they had to taste was a donut, and they had to eat the whole donut. It was like a big, greasy, fried, glazed donut. And all these women were on diets, right? They recruited them because they were on diets. And then afterward, they broke them into three groups. One group, they told them to be compassionate about the fact, hey, don't beat yourself up. It's okay. It was kind of part of, we know that it's troubling, but everyone had to do it. It's only human. Don't beat yourself up. Try to be kind and supportive to yourself. The other third, they tried to boost their self-esteem. Hey, write about things that you really like about yourself. And the third group, they didn't tell anything, which meant they were probably beating themselves up. I mean, they didn't tell the subjects beat yourself up, but they probably were beating themselves up, right? And then the second part of the experiment, they said, okay, well, we have another part of the experiment. We'd like you to rate how flavorful these candies are. They were like M&Ms. So they gave them a big bowl of candies. And then they left the room. The experimenter left the room for a while and said, okay, just try these out, see if you like them or not. And then they came back in. And later they actually measured how many M&Ms they had eaten. And what they found was that the women who were told to be compassionate about breaking their diet, which they had done with the glazed donut, didn't eat very many M&Ms. But the ones who were either told to boost their self-esteem or weren't told anything, so in other words, they beat themselves up, ate a lot more M&Ms. And so again, that's kind of illustrating what happens, right? We break our diet, we beat ourselves up. Oh, I'm a loser. We feel upset. What's a habitual way of feeling better when we feel upset? We eat, right? And by the way, there's another study, because overeating is also linked to diabetes. There's another study that showed that people who participated in the Mindful Self-Compassion program, which is the program I've developed with colleagues, 8-week self-compassion training, not only did they gain self-compassion, they actually lowered their glucose levels, right? And part of this is related to the fact that they're more able to stick to the regime, whether it's medication and eating. But it actually, 8 weeks of training, they measured their glucose before and after the training, and their glucose levels actually went down and were stabilized. So it's really powerful medicine.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase that I often use, which seems very apt in relevance to what you've just said, is that we used to eat to fill a hole in our stomachs. Now we're often eating to fill a hole in our hearts.
Yes.
And if we're not compassionate to ourselves, then actually that, in many ways, that hole in our heart becomes bigger and bigger, and we seek all kinds of different behaviors. Yes, it could be food, it could be sugar, but it could be gambling. It could be scrolling for 4 hours on Instagram every evening. It could be, alcohol, porn addiction, whatever it is. There can be all kinds of things that actually are stemming from this lack of feeling whole in who you are, compassionate to who you are. Something you said before about medical students, I found really interesting, because I think I used to be okay, let's be totally honest here. I was very, very harsh with myself. I can remember, I'm not sure I should be admitting this, but I can remember at medical school going with one of my buddies to the pool hall in Edinburgh called Diane's Pool Hall. And, I love playing snooker and pool. It's one of my favorite sports to play. And if I wasn't playing very well, or I was losing against a friend who I thought I should be beating, I'd go into the men's toilets and I'd look in front of the mirror and I'd look at me and I'd slap my face. Come on, you loser. You can do this. Sort yourself out. Now, this sounds really trivial, okay, because it would work. The thing is, it would work in the short term.
Yeah.
I'd come out thinking that, yeah, I'm a loser for losing that last game. I'm going to sort myself out and then go and I'd play really well after that, typically, and win. So that then reinforces, oh, this works. This works. Yeah. And I remember doing, I can feel it as I talk about it, similar type of behavioral patterns. Now, that's been getting less for a number of years, but we still fall into old patterns. And I tell you why that story almost comes full circle. I'm very mindful, I try to be, of how I behave and talk to myself in front of my children. Yes. Because I don't want to model negative self-talk to them. Yes. I was playing snooker with my son the other day, and normally I don't, but something slipped out. And it wasn't too bad, but I was like, I can't believe you missed that. I was talking to myself, and my son said to me, "Hey, Daddy, come on, don't talk to yourself like that." And it was really gorgeous, actually, because in the past, when he's ever said anything like that, I've said, "Hey, darling, listen, it's okay. But you don't talk to yourself like that. Treat yourself better than you would treat even your friends, right? Why would you talk to yourself like that?" And it was so lovely that he started to, in a really compassionate way, call me out on it. And I thought, oh yeah, thanks for reminding me.
Yeah. And modeling is definitely one of the ways we develop our levels of self-compassion as adults. And it's either parents were critical of you or they are very self-critical, and then we pick that up.
But in that story, I just want to say, I feel that negative self-talk, in the short term, it got me to get through an exam, win a snooker match, right? But I think it came at a cost. And it's what you said about those hidden side effects. I think it came from a place of lack, of not feeling good enough at just being me. Because why does it matter if you lose a snooker game? But for me, it became my identity. If I lost it would say something about who I was as a person. As I become more compassionate to myself, I feel happier. I feel calmer. I feel I'm less likely to engage in behaviors I'm trying not to engage in, because I just don't feel the need to plug that gap anymore.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the research shows not only are you happier and you're more satisfied with your life, you're also able to give more to others in relationships, right? Some people think that self-compassion is selfish, but in fact, people who have self-compassionate romantic partners, they say their partners they're kinder, they're more intimate, they're more loving, they're less controlling, they get less angry. People are more satisfied with partners who are self-compassionate. And that's because when you aren't beating yourself up and you're kind of filling your own reserves with these feelings of kindness and support and connectedness, you actually have more available to give others.
The way we talk about movement in society has conventionally been around, burning off energy, burning off calories. It's good for your physical health. It's a very one-dimensional narrative.
Yeah, it's punishment for enjoying life. That's how a lot of people think about it. Like, oh, I indulged, so now I have to repent.
Yeah, you mentioned punishment, but even the vernacular around movement, I'm going to kill myself in the gym. What does that mean? We've sort of, I don't think we have realized the implications of talking about movement in this way has had, because some people will say, it's just not for me, exercise. It's just not for me, movement. What would you say to people who say that?
And mindset, influences so much of how we experience something. So I describe movement as using your body to engage with life. And I think of whether you call it movement or you call it exercise, it's really about finding an activity that allows you to engage with life the way that you want to. So maybe you love how it feels when you go for a walk in nature, or you love how it feels when you run and you feel fast and free and you can sense your own persistence. Or you love how it feels to move and flow in Tai Chi or yoga, or have dance parties in your living room with your kid. And that you use your body to engage with life, to express different aspects of your human nature, to connect with other people. And, if you're experiencing movement instead as a punishment for something you ate, or an investment in your future well-being that is not connected to something you actually enjoy, it just sets people up to, first of all, find an activity that they hate. I mean, if people are obsessed with looking at their watch and seeing like these calorie counters, or, counting how many steps they've taken, it's very easy to miss how powerful you feel when you lift something heavy, or how much fun it is to high five someone after you do an exercise, or, go for a run. So I think we need a total mindset reset about what movement is and why we do it, so that people, first of all, are more likely to choose something that actually connects them to joy and meaning. And also so that we can sort of escape the voices in the head that often come up when you come to exercise from a place of shame or fear that's so common.
Yeah, it's really common. I thought a lot about fitness trackers over the past few years, and my view on them has sort of changed, and it does from day to day, because I kind of see them a little bit like blood pressure monitors, in the sense that some patients say, hey, doctor, shall I buy a blood pressure monitor? And for some of them, it's the best thing in the world, because they check it once a week. They use it as a way to, nudge them in the right direction. If the blood pressure is going up, they'll say, oh, you know what, I need to get back on track with my lifestyle. Whereas other people will buy it and check it 2-3 times a day, stress out every time it's a little change, and it almost becomes paralyzing. And I'm interested in your view. I guess for me, fitness trackers can potentially be a very similar thing. I do feel more and more that we have become so obsessed with what's on our wrist or what's on our phone that we've lost connection with what the movement is. Yeah. Now, I totally accept for some people it can be motivating. They're like, you know what? I've only got 6,000 steps today. I want to hit 10,000 a day. That's going to motivate me to go out. So I think it's about finding the balance somewhere. And I guess for different people, the balance is somewhere different. But what's your view on these trackers?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of, you need to conduct an experiment on yourself. So I'm always encouraging people to think about what their goal is and what their values are. And like, is this something that supports you in doing what is important to you? I think fitness trackers are often a first start for people. I have a friend recently, they're trying to motivate someone in the family to move more. So they all got one together so that they could support this one person. I like that idea of it. There's a story in my book about a woman who wanted to become active after experiencing a devastating loss. And so her husband gave her a Fitbit for Christmas, and she said, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to embrace life and start moving forward. And that helped her feel like she was making some progress. And then she found a running group, and it was actually the community support of the running group that helped her get to the next stage of moving through her grief. But the Fitbit was the first start. So I feel like, for a lot of people, it's worth experimenting with. But I really agree with this idea that if you get obsessed with metrics, you might not be paying attention to your direct experience. And I think paying attention to your direct experience gives you so much feedback about, for example, when you move, do you feel better afterwards? Yeah. That is a really great metric that your counter is not going to be able to tell you. But when you found the ideal form of movement for you, you shouldn't have to recover psychologically from it. You should feel set up to walk into your home or your next meeting with a sense of, I feel more energized, I feel more optimistic, I'm like a best version of myself. And, there's no fitness tracker that's going to tell you that, but you can check in with how you feel. Yeah,
it's almost as if at the end of the run or the race or whatever, like there's such an obsession with, okay, what happened? What was my heart rate? What was this? We're actually in that moment where we could be tapping into our hearts and how we're feeling. We can be distracted by these other metrics that, frankly, we can check later as well. And maybe the take home might be for some of us is when we finish that particular movement, maybe sit with it for a minute or two. Just how do you feel? You can check the metrics later if that's something that means a lot to you, but maybe don't do it straight away, potentially. I never like telling people what they should be doing. It's about just having, hopefully, sharing ideas that may or may not resonate.
Yeah. Is it helping you experience movement in a way that you enjoy, and is it helping you stay active? And I feel like everything about the science is an experiment that you conduct on yourself. I mean, actually, the research suggests that probably trackers aren't that effective at motivating people, but it does for some people.
It does for some.
It really does.
But that's inherently the problem. I wouldn't say the problem, but that is what we see with research all the time, right? Isn't it? We look at these gross conclusions, these simplifications.
And it's always an average, and there's
always
always
an
a
average.
distribution, and who knows, you might be the outlier.
Yeah,
right?
and if you're someone listening to this right now, you might go, hold on a minute. I get what you're saying, Kelly, or what you're saying, Rangan, but ultimately, this fitness tracker on my wrist is the only thing that it's got me off the sofa, and now I run it every other day, and I love it. And the tracker made me do that and helps me do it. Fine.
Wonderful.
Yeah. You mentioned a running group. Have you heard of something called Park Run?
Yes, of course.
Is it big here in the States?
I don't know, because so many of the people, so I write about Good Gym in the book, and a lot of people who are participants in Good Gym also are big fans of Park Run. So that's how I've heard it come up quite a bit from people who are running in
Park
Good Gym.
Run is, it's almost like an epidemic in the UK at the moment. It's a good epidemic. It's growing rapidly. And I actually interviewed the CEO of Park Run on this podcast maybe a year ago. And what was really interesting is that he said, Rangan, the thing about Park Run is that Park Run is a social intervention masquerading as a running event.
I know. I love it. I feel the same way about the classes that I teach, that people show up thinking they're showing up for a workout, and then they have a positive experience of belonging and connection. And as I've heard from people who are part of these running groups too, that they can become a real source of social support. I mean, there's so many important dimensions of social community. They're your close relationships, your partnerships in life, your family. But it's so important to have social relationships that are a little bit casual, but where you can show up and belong, where people are happy to see you. And when you're having a bad day, they give you, just that level of support where it's okay to be who you are, and there are people who care. And it's amazing how much movement facilitates that level of connection, where you're sort of allowed to be who you are. When things are difficult, people support you in this kind of easy way that we sometimes don't find in our close relationships, where things get very complicated. And so I think that Park Run is a great example of that. Good Gym is a great example of that. And here in the U.S., you see that a lot with CrossFit gyms and group exercise classes.
Yeah, Park Run has transformed my weekends and my family's weekends. My son first noticed some runners in the local park maybe 3-4 years back, said, Daddy, what are they doing? Why have they all got these things on and stuff? And, that's how we got into Park Run. And we started as, in the UK, on Saturdays as the adult Park Run, which is a 5K run. And on the Sundays, in some areas, they have a kids Park Run, which is a 2K run. So I think since my son was 5, we've been doing the 2K run, which, they would walk at first and they run, but now he does the adult one every Saturday. Even on Saturday, I think he did it while I was flying. He actually does it, with someone else, because under the age of 11, you can't do it without a responsible adult with you. But what it's done is not only that fitness, it helps us feel part of the local community, right? And I know I've heard you on a previous podcast, you mentioned values. You mentioned one of your values has been recently, I think, to engage with your local community. Now, there's many ways you can engage with a local community, but movement is such a beautiful way to do it, because I've noticed with my kids, because they see the same people every week, they bump into the same people in the supermarket. It helps you feel that, in this increasingly disconnected and isolated world, it brings people together. And one of the theses, one of the central ideas in your book that I'm getting as I read it, is this idea that moving together with other people helps us to cooperate and feel part of that. And that's incredible. That's a different narrative on movement than what we're conventionally being told.
I know, and it's such a needed medicine in our world right now, that kind of belonging and community. I think one of the reasons why movement and things like Park Run or things like my dance classes help people experience that is movement often asks us to be the best version of ourselves, and also like good friends to other human beings. So, you go for a run, and it's just so natural to cheer other people on. Like if you finish first, to support other people in finishing. It's so natural to receive that support. It's like an easier place to allow yourself to be congratulated and supported. We get to practice these kind of rituals of just like easy human interdependence, which can be sometimes a little bit different than sometimes team sports. I know in the US, there's a lot of concern about people getting like so competitive with it and it bringing out maybe the worst side of parents or kids. But in things like runs and, like ninja warrior training and all these other places where people are experiencing connection, it's because like you're asked to do things that are a little bit hard. And then when you do it, people congratulate you and see your strength, and you get to do that for others. And there's this kind of bigger than self effort and bigger than self joy that people experience. That is, some psychologists call it a sense of we agency. Like you get together and you're doing something and you experience a sense of self that literally transcends like the borders of your skin and your body. You feel connected to almost like a community is like an organism in itself. I mean, it's such like, we could get into the neuroscience of this, but literally if you're running in a pack or you're in a dance class and you're moving in sync with other people, your brain starts to expand its sense of awareness so that you literally can, like the people you see running in stride with you or the people you see moving in a dance class with you, your brain is like, that's happening at the same time that my brain is saying run or stretch your arm. And it just starts to assume I'm part of something bigger, an organism that's all moving as one. And it creates this amazing sense of self-transcendence.
It's incredible that, you're a trained scientist, and we can and we will go into the neuroscience and what's going on when we move. But there's another narrative at play here, isn't there? There's an almost non-scientific, almost spiritual narrative. Yeah. And I find that incredibly fascinating, the science and the spirituality together, because I think we all know that for people who do move. Before we started, you were saying that this is a love letter, isn't it? This your book, and it's going to help people who have experienced joy and improvements of their mental health when they move. It's going to help them go, yeah, this is why it happens, and I feel that as well. But there's, I spoke to someone called Sanjay Rawal on this podcast. In fact, last time I was in LA, I interviewed him here. I think you'd love that podcast, actually. He was the director on a film called 3100s, where it's this race in New York, around central New York, where they run.
Oh, yes. I think the New Yorker wrote an article about this.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. I'm familiar with this.
Yeah, and it was just incredible. And these guys move around like a 1 mile block in New York City. And they do it for about 50, 60 days. They're running like over a marathon a day. Mm-hmm. And it's just incredible, but it's because it is about self-transcendence. It's about movement, I think, as a way of bringing people together. Movement as a way of, becoming greater than your individuality. And I sort of feel, I don't know, is this why movements and running and endurance events, why they're growing and they're becoming more and more popular all around the world? Have we become a disconnected, isolated society where actually we are discovering more and more now that when we push ourselves outside our comfort zone and we do, let's say, an endurance event, or we go out and challenge our bodies, it's actually having benefits for us far beyond the physical benefits, but there's mental and emotional benefits as well.
Absolutely. So, oh gosh, there's so much I want to say about this. Let me just backtrack for a second. So you mentioned I'm a scientist, and one of the things that I want to communicate is that for me, science and spirituality are not in opposition. So if you were to look at my early work, I did a lot of work looking at yoga and my research on meditation and sort of what's happening in your body and brain and what the benefits of that are. And I feel like, it's not that we need science to prove things that we can directly experience, but sometimes the science can also help us feel that sense of awe and wonder. Like when I understand that my muscles are sending proteins into my bloodstream that act to give my brain hope when they cross the blood-brain barrier, I experience a sense of awe and wonder that actually feels almost spiritual. So I feel like one of my goals is actually to help people to have almost like a religious experience around the neuroscience too. It's a phenomenal what humans are capable of. But so this idea that maybe people are experiencing in their current state of isolation or alienation and despair, the need to come together to move or to do these ultra endurance events. I think that's definitely true. And one of the things that I didn't realize until I started talking to so many people is that intensity actually matters. So one of the things that you will hear when people are being encouraged to exercise initially is you only have to do a minute. And it's true, there's no dose that's too small to get physical and mental health benefits. You could do as close to nothing, and as soon as you take a breath, as soon as you take a single squat, everything is good for you. But there does seem to be a dose response. And for people who are dealing with mental health challenges, people who are dealing with a sense of isolation, sometimes doing things that are really hard seems to kick into gear what's happening in your brain and what happens in your sense of self and your ability to experience transcendence that you can experience while doing a marathon or an ultra marathon that maybe you're not going to experience when you first take that walk around the block. And I think that was a theme that really was revealed to me in so many stories of people who have these amazing spiritual experiences, whether they're running an ultra marathon or hiking in nature, or the first time they power lift. There was one woman in the book who had a personal best in a power lift, and you think that's hard, and she sensed her strength in such an amazing way. This was someone who was dealing with severe depression, and she decided not to take her own life. She had a plan to take her own life, and she decided she wanted to live because of that kind of spiritual and emotional experience of literally sensing a strength in herself she didn't know she had. And so one of the things that one of the messages I'm trying to give people is, don't be afraid of going beyond what you think you're capable of. If there's any part of you. So many people I talk to for this book, they're like, so the good news is we don't have to run a marathon. Like you say, 3 minutes of exercise can boost your mood. Yes, that is definitely true. And also, you might want to run a marathon. Yeah. You might even want to run an ultra marathon to have these transcendent experiences. And that's also an option.
Yeah, there's so much about movement and how we talk about it, because some people will be listening and they'll be thinking, some people will be running while they're listening to this,
yeah.
right? And be going, yeah, this is why I run. This is incredible. This is what I feel like after my run. But there'll also be someone who might be listening to this while slumped on their sofa in the evening, and they hear the words ultramarathon and they're thinking, yeah, that just doesn't connect with me and my life. Yeah. I'm busy, I work 2 jobs, I'm exhausted, I come home and I just want to sit in front of the TV and unwind because life is tough. So to that person who struggles to even go for a 20-minute walk every day,
yeah,
what would you say to that person?
Well, so first of all, I often will tell people, pick a song you love because of the power of music, and then do any sort of movement that works for your body in this moment to the duration of a song you love, or a song that reminds you of someone that you love. And you do whatever movement feels accessible and positive in this moment. And people be like, well, what do you mean? Do I have to do exercises? You know what? Most people can figure out how to move their bodies in ways that work for them in that moment. Yeah. So it could be you stand up and stretch. It could be that you just play. Maybe you shadow box. I mean, the body has an intelligence. Maybe, so somebody who didn't actually make it into the book, but someone's story that I was really moved by was someone who literally had trouble standing because of his health challenges. And he worked up to being able to walk the hallway of his apartment. And that was a big milestone. And then he worked his way up to being able to leave his apartment and walk around the block. Thing is, there's always a milestone that's within reach, and you can move with whatever parts of your body still move. So, in the book, I visited dance classes for people with Parkinson's disease, a gym for people with severe disabilities and neurological disorders. No matter what is present in your body right now, I'm also someone who deals with chronic pain. So I understand that there can be a lot of things going on inside of you, whether it's depression or grief or anxiety or pain, that makes movement feel intimidating. And a lot of this is about self-trust, that you don't need to listen to somebody else say you have to do a minimum of 20 minutes or a minimum of an hour, or it has to be this hard. That if you set the intention to move your body with gratitude for having a connection to life, that often people can innovate their own early workouts, and then you can go find a community that supports you if that's of interest to you.
Yeah, Kelly, I love that. I mean, there's so much of what you say, so much of what you write about that deeply, deeply connects with me, and which I'm so excited to be talking to you. That we've become, I mentioned I didn't like the word prescription before in this context, and I don't. And even the way we set up public health guidelines, I get it, right? I understand we have to give broad recommendations to the population. You must do 30 minutes of minimum to, moderate.
Do we though? Even isn't it funny? Like everyone, they keep changing the recommend. I've been a fitness professional for 20 years. The recommendations are always changing, and it seems like the recommendations, in part, it's based on research, and part it's like, oh my gosh, what can we get people to actually do? Let's change the recommendations. Maybe they'll do it. If they know they only have to do it in 5 to 10 minute increments and it doesn't have to be all at once, maybe then they'll do it.
And maybe,
and it's like,
maybe fundamentally the guy,
guideline is move. That's it. Yeah. Whatever you can do, whatever you're willing to do.
Yeah, and as controversial as this potentially is, maybe guidelines might be part of the problem, because we are making it too prescriptive, too didactic, that this is what we, the body, the public health body, or the government say you should be doing each day, right? And fundamentally, I don't think anyone likes to be told what to do long term, but B, I really love what you said, like when I asked you, what will you say to that person who doesn't want to move or thinks it's not for them? Everyone likes me. There's always a song that somebody likes on some level, right? Yeah. It may not be your taste, it may not be my taste.
Music, it might be nature, right? So there's so many movement. So the other thing, I usually start with a song, but there's some people who don't love to move to music. So think about something that you already love, and then think of an activity that allows you to do that. So, if you love animals and maybe you don't have a pet, you can't have a pet because of where you live or your circumstances. Do you know how many animal shelters will let you volunteer to take a dog for a walk or a run? Maybe there's a person you want to spend time with. Maybe they love an activity and you could choose to do it with them. Do you know how much that strengthens a relationship when you endorse an activity that someone else loves and they feel like it's their best self, and you're like, okay, I'll go to that yoga class with you. There's a lot of ways to think about who and what you already enjoy. And I think that rather than thinking of durations and intensities, 30 minutes must be moderate, people don't even know what that means. I think that we should view movement as being as essential to human survival as eating and sleeping. You don't say, I'll do it once on the weekend. It's part of how you live your life. And if you can find ways to make it part of your life so that it's not a chore, it's an activity you love, so maybe it's part of your recreation, or it's part of how you get about your life. You run errands by cycling or walking, or it's how you connect with people in your life. If you're going to spend 20 minutes with your partner or with your kid, why not make that a movement, since we know that the neurochemistry of movement helps us bond and connect with others. Yeah. And I really think this idea that it's something that you're shoving into your life that's divorced from your life is one of the reasons people don't actually do it.
Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this conversation, there's loads more like it on my channel. Please do press subscribe and hit that bell. Now, back to the conversation. Why do you think relationships are so important? Why have relationships sort of become fragmented in the way we live these days? And what can we do about it?
Yeah. I think relationships are the point. They're not just important, they're the point. We've talked ourselves into this idea that we're all separately, as if we're walking next to each other, but we're all separately on this, big journey to achievement and outcomes collectively, if it's convenient. And sometimes we might even link arms, but we've forgotten that the point, the joy, the very raison d'etre, the thing that we're here for is each other, is to connect. That's where all the joy is. If you win the World Cup and there's nobody in the stadium, how does that feel? Or nobody's tuned in. It's the shared joy of our journeys that is the point.
Yeah. You talking about relationships reminds me of this chat I had with Esther Perel recently. Mm. And she said something that, again, I've been thinking about a lot. And because I think I also had a slightly individualistic idea, thinking that actually, if I can sort my own baggage out and kind of, sort of lighten the load a little bit and actually get my own house in order, I'm going to show up in a much more present and less triggerable way in my relationship, which I think has happened for sure. But she was sort of saying that the idea that we can do this stuff in isolation, she's like, I don't get it, because we are relational beings. We only exist within relationships.
Yeah.
And that is something that I sort of think, wow, it's kind of true. I'm not saying it's necessarily either or. You can do a bit of both, I'm sure. But I mean, what would you say to that?
Exactly. I agree fully. I mean, imagine if your fear was dialed down enough and shame was dialed down enough that you could just show up and work it out in relationship, rather than having to do your work and get to some level of perfect before you can go back in to the relationship or the exchange. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's lots of brilliant work that happens from a self-help perspective. Sure. That's about, managing your own emotions. But I feel like if we were less concerned with perfectionism and being right, and we were more free, we'd be able, and less shameful and fearful, we'd be able to actually exchange more openly and have those conversations. I ask, what is the worst thing that somebody who loves you could know about you? And we never share all of ourselves. I don't think we're actually even capable of sharing every aspect of ourselves and our psychology. But we actually hide so much of who we are in our deepest, closest relationships. And some of that is about fear and shame.
Yeah. What would our partner think of us if they found that out? Right. And therefore we hide. I just turned the page because I've got this thing written down. I think I was reading about some research, this chap called Dr. Bella DiPaulo, who did some research saying that people are dishonest in 1/5 of their interactions. And again, I don't know the study intimately to know, how that was being measured, but I thought that was just a very powerful statistic. 20% of the time we're dishonest. And I think what's crazy about that, or what's most telling, is I suspect that a lot of the time we don't even realize we're being dishonest.
Right, because we're performing. So this, I think it's a really, I don't know the study either, but it's a really interesting idea, because when we say a word like dishonest, we might jump to the idea of intention. We're intentionally doing something manipulative to get an outcome we want. And that's kind of like a prevalent view of human nature, that we're self-serving, consequentialist, and we'll just get our own needs met. Whereas I personally think that we're performing a lot of the time, and we're performing because we need to feel that we're seen in a particular way so that we're good enough. So if we could unpack some more of that, I think that mental freedom is on the other side of it, or more mental freedom is on the other side of it. It's the performative nature of us showing up, and with all our, what's that beautiful quote? And I don't remember who said it, but I'm just a bunch of flaws stitched together with good intentions. Yeah. And it's perfect, because it's not about it's not about sort of a resignation or presuming you won't try and find your very best potential or express your talent as best you can. But it's the idea that if you don't do it a particular way, you're not worthy and good enough as a human being. And therefore everything else is sort of anchored into that.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you, I can't shake this idea that you mentioned. Are you performing at life, or are you living life? I think it's so powerful. Again, I can't imagine that won't have an impact on every single person listening or watching this right now. I'd ask everyone to just ask themselves, are you performing at life, or are you living your life? Mm-hmm. It's so simple yet so profound.
And I would want to just add to that it's not another area to lay blame on yourself, because we all do it. It's the whole conversation, the whole compassionate conversation I'm hoping to have is like, okay, where's the dial down button? How do I turn this down? We all do it. It springs up. How do I turn it down again? And how do I let go? Sometimes we feel like we've got to add something. Most of the time, this stuff is just letting go. It's like uncurling your hands and letting go of some stuff, trusting yourself a bit more, being brave in that way rather than another level of perfectionism that you have to achieve. Like, now I must not perform at life.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's a really important point. One of the values that I have been thinking about and trying to bring into my life in a very intentional way is integrity and honesty. And I've realized that a lot of the time, when you don't want to do something, you want to get out of something, you'd create a story to do it. You'd create a lie. You'd say, oh, I can't do this because of this. Right? And the intention behind it is good. You're like, okay, I can't do that, but how do I let them down in a nice way? Right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I've been trying to change that and go, no, if I really want to live with integrity, how can I sort of be truthful without upsetting someone? Mm-hmm. And it's something I guess I'm really working on myself. And there's so many examples. The one that comes to mind is someone who I've met through Instagram, who's someone I respect a lot, was holding an online conference in August, and she wanted me to give a keynote and do an interview. And she approached me about this towards the end of July. And at the end of July, I was feeling, one of the reasons I stopped the podcast over the summer is because I was feeling really overwhelmed. I wanted to reset, spend time with my family, spend time with myself. Mm-hmm. And I thought, you know what? It's only because it's her that I'm even considering it, because for most people, it would be a straight no. And then I decided I'm just going to be honest with her. I phoned her up and said, hey, look, I would love to. I think what you're doing is amazing. But I've made a decision that for the next few weeks, I'm not going to be doing I'm not going to take on any new commitments at all. I'm going to spend time with my family. I've got my book to finish off over the summer. That's going to be enough on my plate. I'll support it, but I can't take part in it. And, she accepted it. She said, thank you for sharing that. I totally respect that. And not only that, Pippa, it felt good. It felt good that I hadn't fabricated a story that would have had the same result. You're still not taking part. Mm-hmm. I don't know if she would have felt it, that I was creating a story, but being honesty and acting with full integrity, which I've got to be honest, is potentially something I may not have done even a year or two ago, because I would have been too scared. Again, it comes down to fear, doesn't it? Yeah. I didn't realize it's fear again. You would be like, oh, I'm scared. What will she think unless I make a powerful enough excuse?
So I love that story, but there's two elements that jump out at me. One is, how we protect our reputation, right? Which is part of that conformity conversation we had before. Yeah. That there's actually a sort of an egoic reputation part of that. But there's also such an interesting question. And it's like, why do we feel the need to apologize? Yeah. What's up with that? Like, if you just say, I'm too tired, what would happen, right? Like, I've had enough. I'm too tired. I don't want to do any more at the minute. Full stop. It's actually a loving thing to say to yourself and others, because when you do that, you give other people permission to do that too. And it's a non-performative, non-heroic, non-muscular position to take. And I think that's fantastic. When I hear people be free like that, I think they're probably getting well.
Yeah. They're probably getting well. Exactly. It for something so simple, which is telling the truth, it's pretty damn hard to get to that, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of crazy how much we fabricate. We don't realize how much it takes away from us, how exhausting it is. Yeah. And you could feel your shoulders drop when you just say, hey, I'm too tired. Yeah. Good luck with it.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a really interesting one I've been thinking about lately. I turned 50 earlier this year, and I've been...
Congratulations.
Thank you. Big birthday. But I've been thinking about integrity in relation to that. So I was kind of shocked by how many people said at the time, one of two things, either, how do you feel? Like, as if something was over. And the second bit of like, oh, you look good for 50. I'm like, wow. Where have we lost our integrity so much that we feel that we can actually show up even physically as we are right now? Like, we feel that we have to do something performative in how we present ourselves. Like, we have to change something in our physical self or cling on to something that's not actually true of where we are. That's for me, kind of, okay, I'm going grey. This is how I look, I aim to be healthy, and that's integrity. That's a piece of my integrity. If I were to perform on that side, I feel like that would take me in the wrong direction, away from, it'd be more status than soul. And I don't think that's helpful for me, at least.
Well, I don't think it's helpful for anyone. And I imagine that person who might have said that, you look good for 50. Well, let's just unpack that, because I imagine that's a societal narrative that many of us have learned. We learn that, someone may not like it, but hey, they look great. So I'm going to say that because I'm going to say something nice to them. So I think the intention behind it, or at least the superficial intention, is I want to say something nice.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But what is actually really underlying that? I'm sure it's different for different people, but I don't know, are there some common sentiments that you think might even be underlying that desire to say something nice?
Yeah, and same thing. It's like this idea that good enough is quite uniform. There's a set of things that, whether it's the right weight, the right shape, whether your butt looks the right way, or you're dressed the right way, or any of that stuff, like there's this uniform idea of good enough, even in a physical sense, and for me that's not a health-based conversation. That's a quantitative, performative conversation, and I think that there's it's missing that sort of soulful well-being when we do that. So I agree, it comes from a good place, but it's all part of that same narrative of like, we've got to be enough.
Yeah, and it just, I've been thinking a lot about the content in your book, and I've been trying to think of what is, I don't think this was in the book, unless I read it, but I was thinking, and you can correct me if maybe this was in your book, I was thinking, what's the opposite of fear? And to me, I was thinking, well, the opposite of fear is authenticity. Because if you're truly authentic, you're not really afraid. Did you write that, or did I think that, or is it a bit of both? I can't remember.
I love it. But that's, I write it as the opposite of fear is mental freedom. But if you're mentally free, you're authentic. Yeah. You're showing up as you, right? With your flaws stitched together with good intentions. So it's like, it's almost the same stuff, but it's, for me, the psychological space that we can create, the mental freedom where we're not hijacked by constant need to be something or do something or move in a particular direction, is that's the absence of fear.
Yeah, and we mentioned authenticity. Let me just tie it back to the podcast for a second, because something really interesting I've been sort of playing around with over the last few weeks and months is, and again, it comes from a fear and a deep insecurity, is like we put the podcast on YouTube now as well. YouTube, social media can be a funny place anyway for comments, but I tell you, YouTube is on another level, and it is amazing how many times, well, it's not that much, but you're obviously you often can be drawn to the negative comments, but a few people will say, man, great conversation, but the interviewer talks too much. Or I had this great conversation with Gabor Mate, someone who I really, really,
fantastic,
really admire, someone I've got a lot of respect for. And, I know some people, and when I first got into Gabor, I sort of scoured YouTube for more and more Gabor videos. And you could see some people are doing that. And then they're like, who's this guy chatting in the way? All I want to hear is Gabor Mate. And who's this Chatterjee chap who's sort of he's talking about stuff I don't want to hear. I just want to hear the wisdom from Gabor. And if you're feeling insecure in yourself, you could be thinking, as I did, do I talk too much? Maybe I need to talk less. And then you start to doubt yourself as a podcast host. You think, well, you're not looking at all the, maybe it's a 20-to-1 ratio where the 20 people go, I love your style. I love the way you tell your own stories. And it just makes it super relevant to me. But then I realized, I unpacked, I thought this comes from insecurity. It comes from a deep insecurity of wanting to be liked. Mm-hmm. And as I sort of understood that, I go, okay, is it true to me that I talk too much? I thought, well, if you ask my wife, I probably do talk quite a lot. That's probably part of my personality. And then I thought, well, I'm sort of happy with that. Like if people want an interview where the host has 10 questions that they ask their guest, you've come to the wrong show, right? Because I'm not an interviewer. I'm having a conversation with Pippa at the moment, right? That's what I do. I have conversations. And I've realized why I'm so passionate about this is I've had to unpack my own psyche a little bit and then get really comfortable with the thought, no, this is the way I do things, right? This is me being my authentic self.
Definitely. I'm proud of you for doing that, because it's not easy to do. There's I think we have sort of 60,000 or more thoughts a day, and the majority are negative and repetitive. So that one rubbish comment or comment that felt rubbish to you, I should say, is going to be bright, illuminated in your mind compared to the other 10 or 20 or 50 that were positive. So we're drawn to the negative naturally. So you do have to, I talk in the book about the techniques to deal with in the moment fear, or, you could extend that to say in the moment sort of negative feeling.
Well, what are some of those techniques that people might be able to use?
Well, for example, the sort of 3 umbrella techniques that I talk about. One is processing it. So processing it might just look like, what is it when you can see yourself doing that, when you can notice yourself doing that, what is it that you do to rebalance or calm? So, that might be a mantra, that might be a cool, deep breath, that might be just something that grounds you, that might be an action like delete.
Yeah.
Actually process it, but come back to you. Do something that's centering for you. Another is distract, which may not work in that particular scenario, but when you're worried about something, or when you're sort of caught up in the moment fear, to distract yourself, and that you can do that in millions of different ways. Music's my go-to in that respect. Yeah. And then the third thing is to rationalize. So, even next time you see that, just to say, okay, there was the one, where are the 20?
Yeah.
Because rationally that you're going to be attracted to the negative, as we all are as humans. So what's the rational rebalance of that? So you can do it that way too, but I think to go back to the point you were making in the example, it's really important to just come back as well to ask yourself, what am I serving here?
Yeah.
What purpose am I serving? Well, as I hear you want to help. You want to help people feel better and live more, right? Yeah. So that's the purpose you're serving. Is that relevant to your purpose? Not really. The negative criticism, whether you talk too much, or it's not really relevant to your purpose. You're always going to have to hone your craft, as we all do. Yeah. And feedback's valuable like that. But, come back to what you're serving, what purpose you're serving. And I think that's really helpful. How many times when I've been the only woman standing on the sideline in very male dominated environments and feeling all sorts of things and getting feedback, like, that's what's she doing there? I can easily go to the negative, but I have to come back. What am I serving? Well, the reason I'm here is because my difference makes a difference.
Yeah, really, really powerful. Motivation is really interesting, because if you really do have compassion for yourself, then motivation actually, I'm guessing, is not that tricky. If you really love yourself, then would someone who loves themselves do nothing at all for their health each day? Would someone who exactly? So actually,
it's not compassionate. It leads to suffering.
Exactly. So what she doesn't need is someone beating her up and saying you're lazy, or the government saying you got to try harder. You are not pulling your weight. Lose weight and save the NHS, which is some of the messaging that's been coming out over the past few months. And I think they're missing a big part of the picture, which is, first of all, for anyone who's really worked with people, they will know, as you've already mentioned, that shame never helped anybody change in the long term. Nobody.
Does it? Yeah. Whether you shame people for being overweight, or like you look at things like race relations, right? If you want to shame oppressors, and that's not going to help them say, okay, you're right, I'm going to change. So even people who are doing really bad things, we need to help them change from a place of care and compassion. Doesn't mean acceptance. Acceptance is not always compassionate. It's part of compassion, but you can't accept behaviors that are harmful. That's not compassionate by definition. So it's, how do you change? Is the change motivated by love, or is it motivated by fear? So shame, self-criticism is like saying, unless you want to hate yourself, you better change. So it's like, okay, I guess I don't want to hate myself, or I don't want to feel shame, so I'll try. But that feeling, that uncertainty, that feeling like, okay, maybe I'm a bad person, that's like, again, pulling the rug out from underneath yourself, creating anxiety that's going to make it harder for you to succeed. But motivation out of love, hey, I want you to change because I see that you're unhappy. I care about you. You are a worthy person. How can I help? How can I help? That's really what self-compassion is. How can I help? And if you don't say how I can help, then you're just part of the problem, whether it's for yourself or other people.
Yeah. I want to get into practical tips later on in this conversation. So for people who want to start a practice of self-compassion, they can have a few pointers as to where to go. But this whole idea of societal conditioning fascinates me. Why is something that really, when you look at it rationally, when you make the case for it, it's quite obvious actually that this is the way we should be talking to ourselves, with love and with compassion, yet we don't. And you mentioned that Britain is very low down, if not bottom off the table. Doesn't surprise me, if I'm honest, because we have a phrase here, you stiff upper lip, you just get on with it, particularly for men, I think.
Yes.
So I'm interested in different countries, the sexes, men v women. Are there, what are the obstacles to self-compassion that you've seen across genders or across different countries, and how might we start to overcome them?
I think part of the reason we're so hard on ourselves is I do think it's part of our human physiology. As you know, the threat defense response is the most easily triggered nervous system reaction to danger, right? It comes online first before the parasympathetic nervous response kicks in to say, okay, it's so safe, or you can feel safe by being connected. They call it a reptilian brain on purpose because even reptiles have this brain, right? This is a natural response, natural safety response. It's universal. We don't want to beat ourselves up for it. We want to have compassion for it. So that's one level. But then on top of that, there are also all these cultural things. So in terms of cultures, now there hasn't been a lot of cross-cultural work. There's just been a little bit. And so I don't want to say too much about it because it's complex, but there are obviously cultural differences. And it's not just East-West. Because, for instance, in Thailand, they have higher levels of self-compassion. Thailand is more Buddhist. They actually, a lot of people meditate. It's kind of part of the culture, this more gentle approach to other people and themselves. Whereas China is incredibly low. It's more Confucian. They actually believe in self-criticism as a way to motivate change. So it's not East-West. So there are differences in Eastern cultures, also in Western cultures. Italy is actually higher in self-compassion. The UK is very low. The United States is kind of in between, but on the lower end. So a lot of the cultural messages we get about, is self-compassion selfish? Is it going to undermine your motivation? Is it a form of self-pity? Is it going to make you weak, right? All these things get in the way. Gender is really interesting. I'm sorry, but gender roles really mess everyone up. Because gender roles tell men that they're allowed to be fierce, but they aren't allowed to be tender. It's okay to be angry. You should be angry. You should be active. You should go out and conquer the world, but don't be too sensitive. Don't be soft, right? And so men's ability to feel the tender self-compassion is inhibited, right? Because they think it's a weakness. Power plays into this as well, right? So power kind of engenders that fierce action. So men are allowed to be fierce, but not tender. Women, it's the exact opposite. We're allowed to be tender and soft and loving, but we aren't allowed to be angry or fierce or stand up for ourselves or claim our power. So gender kind of messes up men and women in slightly different ways. So if you look at in terms of who's more compassionate, they're actually pretty close, but women are slightly less self-compassionate than men. And basically the where it comes from, and that's linked to gender roles, androgynous women are not. It's because women are taught they shouldn't meet their own needs. They should always meet other people's needs. So women are actually much more compassionate to others than men are, but slightly less self-compassionate because we feel like, oh, we aren't allowed to meet our own needs. And that's kind of a form of fear self-compassion. So gender and culture really play into all of this. And it's the reason it's a tragedy is because this is a human thing. It's not about being male or female, or it doesn't matter, whether you're cisgendered or transgender, or whatever it is, whether, whatever culture you're from. As human beings, we need both tender and fierce self-compassion in order to be healthy and whole. But society really is a barrier. And so I'm writing this new book called Fierce Self-Compassion that's released, it's going to be released in June, that really talks about this and really talks about how we need to stand up to some of these restrictive gender roles and say, actually, what do I really need to be healthy, to be happy, to be whole, whether that's physically healthy, whether that's mentally healthy. And in order to be healthy, we need both fierce and tender self-compassion, and they need to be in balance. Again, like with motivation, if it's too much acceptance and not enough of that fierce, hey, you got to do something about this, it's not healthy, that's not good. On the other hand, if it's just about, striving and get it right and be the best, and there's no bottom line of self-acceptance, that's not good either. We need both. Constantly, and they're always in balance. And part of the issue is we get knocked off balance and we say, okay, what do I need? Well, sometimes I need a little more acceptance. Sometimes I need a little more change. We don't know. It changes moment to moment. But how many people actually pause to ask themselves, what do I really need in this moment to be healthy?
Yeah.
Think about that. Think about if before, and by the way, I'm guilty too with all the craziness in the United States. I've been watching way too much TV, but sometimes I catch myself and I say, what do I need right now? Do I really need to watch more TV and get upset? Or maybe what I need is to go to bed, or maybe what I need is a cup of tea. Asking yourself the question is really, will eventually provide its own answer.
Yeah, so many things I want to follow up on there. What you said about women definitely mirrors my own experience in clinical practice.
Uh-huh.
The way I've seen it show up is that when I would talk to a lot of my female patients about, hey, listen, you need a bit of me time every day. You need a bit of time to yourself, or what I can see is that you're looking after your kids, you're looking after your parents, you're looking after your husband. But what are you doing for yourself? And I found that when I actually can help them take a bit of time for themselves, the results on their symptoms can be quite dramatic. One patient with really bad Crohn's disease and with lots of gastrointestinal symptoms every day went down by 50%. Now, I didn't call this self-compassion. I just asked her to take 15, 20 minutes to herself each day where she just did something unashamedly for her, not with a phone, not with anyone else. And I was like, really? And I've seen that over and over again because, as you say, it's to do with the stress response, and the stress response affects every single organ system. So if you can start to lower that, you can see improvement in symptoms in all different kinds of areas of the body. So that's one thing I really resonate with in terms of how you describe that. Again, I didn't see it as self-compassion, but now I would probably look at it slightly differently. The other point was how you said that a lot of women are really good about being compassionate to others, but not to themselves. And then I really thought, well, this is quite an interesting conflict, isn't it? Because one might imagine that if you can radiate compassion, then that's gonna go to others and to yourself. But what you're saying is that these things are actually quite separate.
Yeah, believe it or not, so in the research, there's a very small correlation between self-compassion and compassion for others. Now, what we know is when you learn to be more self-compassionate, it increases not only your ability to be compassionate to others, but to sustain being compassionate to others without burning out. But because so many people, especially women, it doesn't, it's actually not true to say you need to be self-compassionate first before you can be compassionate to others, because that's actually not the case. There are many, many people who are very kind, compassionate, and giving to others who treat themselves horribly. So they don't necessarily go hand in hand. Part of what happens when you learn to be more self-compassionate is to become more integrated. And again, you are more able to therefore be even more compassionate to others, but especially to do it in a balanced way that's not going to burn you out. But yes, women, and I hate to say this. Well, I don't hate to say this. I'm going to just say it. Hierarchy comes into this to some level. I mean, women, we've been taught that we're supposed to meet other people's needs and that our needs don't count. And that's really convenient for people with power who get to say that, okay, women, you meet my needs and don't meet your own. And part of, I think, this movement toward equality that women are asking for is, hey, my needs count too. Right? It's not okay for me just to meet others' needs. My needs count too. It's not that my needs count more than other people's needs, but they have to be included in the calculation of what do I do in this moment. There always has to be balance. So you might say in a way that self-compassion is a political as well as a personal act, because once you start saying that my needs are important too, then that also shifts the balance of power in society.
Is the ability to be self-compassionate something you are born with, or is it a skill that can be cultivated?
It's both. It's both. Any question like that, nature or nurture, it's always both, as you know. Well, so certainly there may be some genetic thing linked to the nervous system. We actually don't have any information on that, but certainly the way we're raised, we know has a big part of it's a big part of it. So if you're raised by parents who criticize you, or if there's a lot of conflict in the home, right? Or maybe if your parents were at all abusive towards you, then you're going to have much more difficult time being compassionate as an adult. Because when you think about it, feelings of closeness and connection are supposed to make you feel safe. But if the people, your family members, actually made you feel unsafe, then it's very hard to treat yourself as if you're worthy and give yourself that sense of safety through your own care. But having said that, self-compassion absolutely can be learned, even by people like with horrible trauma histories. There's an amazing scholar named Sir Paul Gilbert, who's from the UK, who does he's the most famous person in terms of the clinical work on self-compassion. He's developed a type of therapy called compassion-focused therapy that's specifically designed for people who struggle with self-compassion, who maybe come from early childhood trauma, and they've found ways to help people even people who are really afraid of self-compassion, help them learn how to be more self-compassionate. So it absolutely can be done. And for people, so again, if you have a trauma history, it takes a little longer, you go a little more slowly. But for people who don't have a trauma history, it's actually a lot easier than you might think, because we already know how to be we already know how to be compassionate to others. We've learned the skill of how to be warm, how to be supportive, how to be understanding, how to be accepting toward others, especially our good friends. And so really the only task is we need to give ourselves permission to be that way with ourselves. And once we give ourselves that permission, we already know what to do. It's not like rocket science.
I think that's quite empowering, because whenever we talk about children or parenting, it can often be quite charged for people. And, many parents will know the feeling that, maybe I'm a bit critical of my kids.
Yeah.
That's how I was raised. There may be that penny dropping moment when you said that, where somebody's thinking, wow, yeah, I'm kind of bringing up my kids with this kind of critical voice, negative self-talk. But then what you went on to say is really quite empowering, which is actually this can be learnt, this can be changed. If you do not have a history of, I think, severe trauma, it can be very, very quick. And even if you have been significantly traumatized, there are ways to actually change this. And I think that's an incredible message to be giving out because it's really, really empowering.
Yeah, in a way, what you might think of if self-compassion is a way of reparenting ourselves, right? Maybe our parents weren't unconditionally accepting. Maybe they weren't supportive. Maybe they didn't encourage us with love. But we can actually learn to do that for ourselves. You can learn treating yourself consistently, fairly, kindly, with encouragement, with support. You can actually learn to feel worthy and to feel safe as an adult. We aren't totally dependent on our parents, which is the good news.
Yeah, that's a nice idea that we can be the very best parent to ourselves. Maybe the aspects of our parenting that we thought, oh, I wish my parents had done this. For example, we go, well, you know what? I can sort that out right now. And actually, I can be the very best parent to myself.
But we also want to have compassion. Maybe your parents were critical, or maybe you're kind of critical. We also want to have compassion for that, because remember, at least there are some psychopaths out there, but most parents who are really critical, they actually think they're helping their child.
Yeah.
Again, maybe you were raised that way, and they actually think, it used to be the accepted parenting philosophy, spare the rod, spoil the child. People honestly believed that unless I'm very harsh with my child, maybe even giving them physical punishment, they're going to be spoiled and it's going to harm my child. And so the best way I can help them is by being very critical and strict. Of course, we know now from research that it's not true, that if you may actually harm your child, make them, turn to drugs, may give them low self-esteem. But the underlying motivation of it is actually a good one.
That point, I think, is so key. You can have the success, but it comes at a cost.
Yes.
And that's, I think, the real conflict we have, because a lot of people feel that if you beat them up or beat yourself up, you can motivate yourself to make changes, work harder. Right. But at what cost does that happen? And I think that's where your work so beautifully comes in, because it's showing people that, hey, you know what? Yeah, that's what we used to think. That's what we used to do. But as humanity evolves and researchers and scientists like yourself study this, you realize, actually, no, that wasn't the best way. This is the best way. Be kind to yourself, be kind to your children. This actually can lead to success without those negative side effects. And I think that's the magic.
This is why we need to know about fierce and tender self-compassion. Because if your choice is be harsh or just totally accept anything, that actually then is kind of a toss-up which one's better. And so the choice was actually a false one for parents who didn't really realize there was this third way. They call it authoritative parenting. You aren't authoritarian, but you aren't indulgent, right? You have got rules, you have boundaries, you might be quite strict, but the bottom line is unconditional love and acceptance. And then once you realize that there's actually a third way available that's much more effective, then it makes a lot more sense than it did when we thought our choices, harsh change or just complacent acceptance.
If you enjoyed that conversation, I think you are really going to enjoy the one I had with the former monk, Jay Shetty, on the simple things that you can do to train your mind. It's right there. Give it a listen and let me know what you think.
The monk mindset is about pursuing your truest goals, your truest self, and your most authentic, aligned goals.